"Hey, you, get out of my courtroom." The bailiff said it, the way some men say a thing they have said 100 times and never once been questioned about. "You do not belong in this building. Move. Quit wasting everyone's time." Have you ever watched a man's certainty come apart in real time, the exact second he understands who he just put his hands on? Because that is where this is going. Stay with me, and let me take you back to where the morning began. The fog had not lifted yet when Elias Reed climbed the stone steps of the Caldwell County Courthouse. 6:30 in the morning. The building sat against the Savannah skyline like an old bruised, red brick darkened by a century of rain, tall columns streaked gray, a copper dome gone green from decades nobody had bothered to fix. He carried a leather briefcase the color of tobacco. The stitching along the handle had come loose years ago, and the brass clasp stuck if you did not press it just right. He had bought that briefcase with his first paycheck as a public defender in Birmingham. 20 years of courtrooms lived inside it. Plea deals scribbled on legal pads at midnight, client files soft at the corners, the smell of burnt coffee pressed into the leather. His mother had asked him once why he never replaced it. He told her the bag was not finished yet. Elias paused at the top step and adjusted his charcoal vest, straightened his navy tie, and looked up at the entrance. Carved above the double doors were 4 words: equal justice under law. The letters had faded. Someone had power washed the left half and quit halfway through, so the word justice stood bright and clean while the rest stayed dull. He smiled at that, just barely. It felt like the truest thing the building had ever said about itself. Inside, the lobby smelled like floor wax and old wood. His shoes echoed on the marble, each step even and unhurried, the walk of a man who measured things before he moved. The hallway stretched both directions, courtrooms to the left, administrative offices to the right. On the wall hung a row of framed portraits in a perfect line. Former judges, every face white, every frame the same dark oak. The last portrait wore a brass plate that read 1986 to 2014. Beside it, a bare nail and a rectangle of paint slightly darker than the wall around it. Waiting. Elias found the bench outside courtroom 3B and sat down. He opened his briefcase, the clasp sticking as always, and pulled out a case file. Whitaker versus Ardent Logistics Group. Wrongful termination. 15 years of loyal service erased by a phone call on a Tuesday morning. He turned the pages slowly, a pen behind his ear, reading the way a surgeon studies a scan before the first cut. The hallway was empty. The building held its breath. He did not know that in 20 minutes he would be dragged across this same floor. Roy Dalton parked his truck crooked across 2 spaces and did not bother fixing it. He slammed the door hard enough to rattle the mirror and crossed the lot with his jaw clenched so tight his teeth ached. 10 minutes earlier, Chief Judge Prescott had called him, not to ask, to tell. A sealed file had leaked last Thursday, and the trail led back to Dalton's desk. Prescott had not raised his voice. He had not needed to. "One more incident, Dalton, and you will be directing parking at the county fair." Roy came through the side entrance and marched down the hall, his boots landing on the marble like small explosions. The brim of his cap sat low over his eyes. Every clerk who saw him coming stepped aside. They knew that look. They had seen it before, and they knew that whoever crossed Roy Dalton on a morning like this one would be the one to pay for it. Dale Fisk sat on a folding chair near the vending machine, sipping gas station coffee from a foam cup. He saw Roy blow past and straightened up. Dale was the kind of man who survived by reading the room. Never the smartest, never the bravest, but always on the right side of whoever held the power. 6 years as a courthouse security guard had taught him one rule: stay close to Roy, stay safe. He watched Roy's face and decided this was not a morning for small talk. Roy turned the corner toward 3B and stopped. There on the bench outside the courtroom, the bench where attorneys waited and clerks set their bags, sat a black man. Alone, quiet, reading a case file like he owned the place. Elias did not look up. He was tracing a paragraph with his pen, mouthing the words silently, the way he did when he wanted to remember something exactly. Roy stared. His eyes moved from the man's face to his hands, to the worn briefcase and back again. A black man in this hallway, sitting where the staff sat, on the worst morning of Roy Dalton's career. Something hot and ugly climbed up out of his chest. "Hey," he said. Elias did not answer fast enough. "Hey." Louder now. Roy crossed to the bench, boots cracking on the marble. "You. What do you think you are doing up here?" Elias looked up. His eyes were calm, the kind of calm that comes from having been yelled at before, and knowing it would happen again. "Good morning," he said. "I have business here today." "Business." Roy repeated the word like it had gone sour on his tongue. He looked the man up and down. The charcoal vest, the navy tie, the tired briefcase. None of it registered. What registered was the skin. "This floor is for court personnel and attorneys." "Which one are you?" "I am, because you do not look like either." Elias closed the file slowly. He set it on top of the briefcase and rested both hands on his knees. "Sir, I promise you I have every reason to be here." Roy laughed. Not a real laugh. The kind that comes right before a man does something he cannot take back. Every reason. He leaned in close enough that Elias could smell the cheap aftershave and the sourness underneath it. "Let me tell you something, friend. I have worked this courthouse for 11 years. I know every face that belongs here, and yours does not." Nadine Colson, the court clerk, came around the corner with a stack of manila folders against her chest. She saw Roy standing over the man. She saw the man sitting still, hands on his knees, back straight. She saw the red flush crawling up out of Roy's collar and the way his hand kept drifting toward the radio on his hip. She kept walking, faster than she needed to. Her heels clicked a quick retreat down the corridor, and she was gone around the corner, without looking back. Elias watched her go, then he turned back to Roy. "Sir, if you would just nothing." Roy unclipped the radio and pressed the button. His voice bounced down the empty hall. "Fisk, second floor, outside 3B. I need a hand with something." By the vending machine, Dale set his coffee on the lid of the trash can. He had been waiting for this without knowing it, the way a dog waits by the table. He hitched his belt, checked his badge, and headed for the stairs. Elias sat on the bench and waited. 2 sets of boots came closer across the marble. Dale appeared at the end of the hall and crossed to Roy with an eagerness that would have embarrassed him if he had stopped to feel it. He planted himself 2 feet behind Roy's right shoulder. "What is the problem?" he asked, though the answer was sitting right in front of him. Roy kept his eyes on Elias. "This gentleman thinks he has business on this floor." Dale looked at Elias, then at Roy, then back at Elias, and made his calculation in under a second. Roy was furious. The hallway was empty. This was his chance to prove he belonged in Roy's circle. He stepped forward. "Stand up." Elias stood. He rose to his full height, 6'2", and looked down at both of them. The briefcase hung at his side, the file tucked under his arm. He stood the way a man stands when he knows he has done nothing wrong and refuses to pretend otherwise. Roy's jaw tightened. He did not like looking up. "You got any ID?" Roy said. "Of course." Elias reached into his jacket and drew out his wallet. He held it open, polite, the way you show a document to someone you still believe might be reasonable. Roy snatched it. He did not look at it, did not open it, did not flip to the card behind the plastic window. He held the wallet up between 2 fingers like something he had found on the floor of a gas station restroom. And then he dropped it. It hit the marble with a flat slap and slid to a stop against the baseboard. "Pick it up," Dale said, grinning now. The kind of grin that feeds on someone else's smallness. "Go on, pick it up." Elias looked at the wallet on the floor. He looked at Dale. He looked at Roy. Then he bent, picked it up, and slid it back into his pocket. He did not say a word. "Now," Roy said, stepping close enough that Elias could count the pores on his nose. "I am going to say this one more time, and I am going to use small words so it lands. This floor is not for you. You do not belong here. You never have. And if you do not walk yourself out that door in the next 10 seconds, I will put my hands on you and move you myself. Are we clear?" Elias straightened his tie. "Sir, I am not leaving." The words dropped like a match into a full tank. Roy grabbed the collar with his left hand and slammed Elias into the wall. His shoulder blade hit the paneling hard enough to rattle the portrait frame beside his head. Judge William Crane, 1971 to 1986, the glass shivering but holding. "You think you can talk back to me?" Roy was breathing through his teeth. "You think a little suit and a little bag make you something? You are nothing. You hear me? Nothing." He shoved him sideways. Elias stumbled, caught himself on the bench, and stood back up. He adjusted his vest. His hands were steady. "I am not leaving, sir," he said again, quieter this time, the same words. Roy's face went from red to purple. He jerked his head at Dale. Dale did not hesitate. He seized the right arm and wrenched it up behind Elias's back. The shoulder twisted, and for the first time the jaw clenched, the first sign of pain the man had shown. Roy took the left arm. 2-on-1. Elias tried to pull free. His shoulders strained, his shoes scraped the marble, but there was no leverage. Not against two men who wanted to hurt him. "Walk," Roy said. They dragged him down the hall. His shoes squealed on the polished floor. The briefcase fell first, hit the ground, and popped open, papers spilling across the marble like dropped cards. A button snapped off his vest and pinged into a corner. His tie came loose and hung sideways. Grace Bellamy stood near the courtroom door with a stack of files pressed to her chest. She saw all of it. 2 uniformed men hauling a man in a suit across the floor, his papers trailing behind him. She took one step forward. Grace, Ted Marsh, the senior attorney beside her, caught her arm without looking up from his phone. "Do not." She stopped. She bit her lip so hard she tasted copper. She watched the man's shoes scrape across the floor she walked every day, and she did nothing. They reached the front entrance. Roy kicked the door open with his boot. Dale shoved him through it. Elias's foot caught the top step, and he pitched forward, hands hitting the stone, knee cracking against the edge, his body coming to rest on the courthouse steps like something discarded. Papers fluttered down around him. One page landed face up on the step beside his hand. The header read Whitaker versus Ardent Logistics Group. Wrongful termination, racial discrimination. Inside, Roy dusted off his hands and gave Dale a single nod. Dale nodded back, wider than he needed to, the satisfied look of a man who thought he had just earned his place. "Handled," Roy said. They walked back inside. The lobby returned to its silence. The clerks went back to their desks. The attorneys went back to their files. The building swallowed the moment whole, the way it had swallowed every moment like it before. Nobody followed him out. Nobody checked if he was hurt. Nobody saw him stand, brush off his knees, and walk slowly around the side of the building toward a door marked private. Judicial staff only. Elias Reed sat on the courthouse steps and bled. Not much. A scrape on the left palm where the stone had bitten through, a dull throb in the right knee where it had cracked against the edge. His vest was missing a button. His tie hung crooked. He did not move for a long time. The fog was lifting now. Sunlight crept across the lot and touched the bottom step, then the second, then the third, working its way up the way warmth always does. Slow, indifferent, arriving only after the damage is done. He looked at his hands, wide hands, thick palms, calluses that 20 years behind a desk had never fully erased. His father's hands, Samuel Reed, carpenter, deacon, a man who could build a porch from scrap lumber and a prayer. Elias had spent his boyhood summers hauling planks and holding levels and learning that the straightest line you will ever draw is the one you measure twice. Samuel had died before the acceptance letter from Georgetown Law arrived. Elias's mother had opened it in her work uniform, standing in the kitchen, and read it aloud to an empty chair at the table. Elias picked up the Whitaker file. Page by page, he gathered the sheets scattered across the steps. One had blown to the bottom of the staircase. He walked down, retrieved it, walked back. Another had caught in the iron railing. He pulled it free, smoothed it flat against his thigh, and set it in the stack. He did this the way his father had taught him to do everything. Carefully, completely, without rushing. A man in a gray suit passed on the sidewalk, glanced at him surrounded by loose paper, and kept walking. People in this town had been not asking for a very long time. Inside, the courthouse had gone back to normal. Phones rang, keys clicked, the building running on the quiet assumption that what had just happened was not worth stopping for. Roy Dalton sat at his station near the courtroom door, boots crossed at the ankle. The anger had drained out of him the way it always did, in a rush onto someone else, leaving behind a flat and satisfied emptiness. He cracked his knuckles and checked his watch. Court in 30 minutes. Dale Fisk stood at the vending machine feeding quarters into the slot for a second coffee. His hands were shaking, just enough that the first coin missed and hit the floor. He picked it up and tried again. He told himself it was the caffeine. He knew it was not. Down the hall, Nadine Colson sat at her desk and stared at a blank email. The cursor blinked. She had been trying to write one sentence for 4 minutes, her fingers hovering and then pulling back like someone testing the edge of a hot stove. She had seen it all. The collar, the twisted arm, the shoes squealing on the marble, and she had turned the corner and kept walking. She told herself there was nothing she could have done. She knew that was a lie. In the first-floor restroom, Grace Bellamy gripped the edges of the sink and stared at herself in the mirror. Her blazer was buttoned wrong, the top button in the second hole. Her eyes were red, but she had not cried. She was too angry to cry. She had taken one step, and Ted had said her name, and she had stopped. That was all it took. One word from a man who was not even looking up from his phone. She thought about the man on the bench, the pressed suit, the steady hands, the way he had said sir to a man who had grabbed him by the throat, the way he had straightened his tie after being thrown into a wall. She splashed water on her face and went back to her desk because she did not know what else to do with what she was feeling, and opened a file. Outside, Elias slid the last of the papers into the briefcase and pressed the clasp with his thumb until it clicked. He stood, brushed the dust off both knees, and checked his watch. Court in 15 minutes. He did not walk toward the parking lot. He did not walk toward the street. He turned right and followed the narrow path along the side of the building, a path most people never noticed, lined with crepe myrtles that had not been trimmed in years, their branches scraping the brick like fingernails. At the end of the path stood a steel door, a card reader with a small green light and a sign. Private, judicial staff only. Elias took a badge from his pocket, the badge Roy had not bothered to look at. The badge that read, in small black letters, Honorable Elias J. Reed, Circuit Court Judge. He swiped it. The light turned green. The lock clicked open. The hallway behind the courtroom was nothing like the front of the building. No marble, no portraits, no polished wood. just a narrow corridor with fluorescent lights that buzzed like trapped insects, and linoleum the color of weak tea. This was the part of the courthouse the public never saw, where judges hung their coats and read their briefs in rooms that smelled of old carpet and coffee reheated twice. Elias walked it alone. His footsteps were softer here. He passed 2 doors with brass nameplates. Judge Prescott, Judge Whitmore. Both closed, both dark. The 3rd door was open. The nameplate was new, the screws still bright. Honorable Elias J. Reed, Circuit Court Judge. He stood in the doorway and looked at his own name. He had seen it on diplomas, on bar certificates, on business cards he had handed to clients who could not pay. But never on a door like this, a door with a lock and a room behind it that was his. Not borrowed, not shared, not temporary. He stepped inside, a wooden desk, a leather chair that had seen better decades. A bookshelf still empty. On the desk, a legal pad, 2 pens, and a phone with a blinking red light. On the wall, a single window that looked out over the lot, where Roy Dalton's truck sat parked crooked across 2 spaces. Elias set the briefcase down and looked in the mirror on the closet door. The man looking back was not the man who had climbed the steps an hour ago. This man had a scrape on his palm, dust on both knees, a missing button, and a tie hanging like a flag after the wind dies. His shoulder ached where Dale had wrenched it. His collar was stretched where Roy had grabbed it. He took off the vest, folded it, removed the tie. He moved slowly, not because he was tired, but because this was a moment he wanted to feel all the way through. He opened the closet. The robe hung on a wooden hanger, centered, pressed, still wrapped in dry cleaning plastic. Black fabric, heavier than it looked. He pulled the plastic off and let it fall to the floor. He held the robe at arm's length. The sleeves hung straight, the hem reaching below his knees. He thought about the kitchen, the empty chair, the letter his mother had read to a man who was no longer there. He thought about what she had said when she finished reading it. Elias, your daddy built houses for people who did not think he deserved to live in one. You are going to build something they cannot tear down. He put the robe on, one arm, then the other. He pulled it across his chest and fastened the buttons, 5 of them, collar to waist, each one clicking into place with a small and final sound. The fabric settled on his shoulders like a hand. He looked in the mirror. The scrape was hidden. The missing button was hidden. The dust, the stretched collar, the ache in his shoulder, all of it disappeared beneath the black. But it was not the robe that changed him. It was his eyes. The calm was still there, but harder now, sharper. The calm of a man who had been thrown out of his own courthouse and had chosen not to break. He picked up the gavel from the desk. Walnut, a brass band around the head, a weight that felt honest in his palm. A knock at the door, a young clerk with a clipboard and an apologetic smile. Your Honor, everyone is seated. We are ready for you. Elias nodded. He walked to the door that led directly into the courtroom. He could hear the murmur on the other side. Attorneys shuffling paper, spectators settling into the pews, the creak of old benches. He put his hand on the handle. On the other side of that door, Roy Dalton stood at his post, chest out, badge polished, with no idea that the man he had thrown down the front steps was about to walk in wearing the one thing in this building that outranked him. Elias turned the handle. The courtroom was full. Every seat in the gallery was taken. Family of the plaintiff, a handful of local reporters with spiral notebooks. 3 law students from Brightwater University who had come to observe. The attorneys sat at their tables, files stacked, pens lined up, water glasses filled. The jury box held 12 citizens who would rather have been anywhere else. Roy Dalton stood at his post beside the entrance, feet shoulder-width apart, hands clasped behind his back. He had buffed his badge with his sleeve after the hallway. His posture was tall and stiff, the posture of a man who believed he had done nothing wrong and was prepared to do it again if he had to. Dale Fisk stood at the opposite corner near the side exit. The second coffee had helped. Stand here. Look alert. Do not think. The morning would be forgotten by lunch. That is what he told himself. Grace Bellamy sat in the second row of the attorney section, her blazer still buttoned wrong, her legal pad open to a blank page. She had not written a word since the restroom. Nadine Colson sat at the clerk's desk below the bench, fingers poised over the keyboard. She had tried to write the man an email and deleted it. Some things do not belong in writing. The courtroom murmured the way courtrooms do before a session. Nobody was watching the door behind the bench. Nobody ever did. The judge always came through that door, and the judge was always just a name the clerk announced before everyone stood and sat back down. The clerk rose. She held a single sheet of paper in both hands, and her voice carried across the room, clear and formal. All rise. The Honorable Judge Elias Reed presiding. Chairs scraped. The gallery stood. The attorney stood. The jury stood. Roy Dalton pulled himself to full height, chin lifted, eyes fixed on the door behind the bench, the door that was now opening. It opened slowly. The first thing anyone saw was the robe, black fabric, catching the overhead light. Then the gavel, walnut against dark skin. Then the polished shoes stepping onto the raised platform with a deliberate, measured pace that made the whole room hold its breath. Then the face. Elias Reed stepped into his courtroom. He did not look at the gallery. He did not look at the attorneys. He did not look at Nadine or Grace or the jury or the reporters with their pens up. He walked past Roy Dalton, close enough to touch, close enough that Roy could see the faint scrape on the man's left hand, the hand that had struck the courthouse steps 40 minutes ago, close enough that if Roy had reached out, he could have grabbed the same collar he had grabbed in the hallway. But the collar was different now. It was black. It was judicial. And it outranked everything Roy Dalton had ever worn, earned, or believed about himself. Roy's face moved through 3 stages in under 2 seconds. First came confusion, his brain trying to reconcile what his eyes were showing him. The same face, the same build, the same jaw, wrapped in something that made no sense. The second was recognition. His mouth opened. No sound came. His lips shaped a word, maybe no, maybe wait, maybe nothing at all, and closed again. The third was fear. Pure, ice water, gut-dropping fear, the kind that starts in the stomach and climbs into the chest and wraps around the throat like a fist. Roy Dalton understood, not gradually, but all at once, like a trap door opening under his feet, that he had dragged a sitting circuit court judge across the floor of his own courthouse and thrown him down the front steps. His right hand, the hand that had grabbed the collar, began to tremble. He pressed it flat against his thigh. It did not stop. Dale Fisk saw it from across the room. He saw the robe. He saw the face. And every drop of blood drained out of his own. His back met the wall behind him before he realized he had stepped back. His hand slipped off his radio and hung at his side like something disconnected. One word hit him like a freight train. Judge. The man whose arm he had twisted was a judge. Grace Bellamy recognized Elias the instant he appeared. She had memorized that face in the hallway. The calm eyes, the steady hands, the way he had said sir to men who did not deserve the word. Now those same eyes looked out over the courtroom from the highest seat in the room. Her pen slipped from her fingers and rolled off the pad onto the floor. She did not pick it up. Nadine Colson's hands hovered over her keyboard. She had typed the date. She had typed the case number. Then Elias had walked out, and her fingers had stopped. She looked up at the man she had passed in the hallway, the man she could have helped, the man she had chosen not to see. And her eyes dropped back to the screen. She could not look at him. Not yet. Elias reached the bench and sat. He set the gavel in front of him, perfectly centered. He opened the Whitaker file, the same file whose pages had scattered across the courthouse steps. The corner of the first page, still faintly gray with stone dust. He looked out at the room. Every face looked back, some with curiosity, some with confusion, two with terror. His voice filled the room, steady and deep. The voice of a man who had been thrown out and walked back in. Court is now in session. Roy Dalton did not move for the rest of the morning. He stood at his post, like a man nailed to the floor, his badge suddenly heavy on his chest, his boots suddenly loud in the silence between the judge's words. Every time Elias spoke, Roy flinched, a small, almost invisible contraction, a man bracing for a blow that had not landed yet. The blow was coming. Roy knew it. He just did not know when. Case number 2024 CV 4416. Whitaker versus Ardent Logistics Group. Wrongful termination. Counsel, identify yourselves for the record. The plaintiff's attorney stood first, a tall woman with silver-streaked hair and reading glasses on a beaded chain. Eleanor Voss, for the plaintiff, James Whitaker. The defense attorney stood second, younger, tan suit, gold cuff links, the confidence of a man who won cases for people who could afford to pay. Nathan Cole, for Ardent Logistics Group. Elias nodded. Ms. Voss, your opening statement. Eleanor Voss walked to the center of the room. She used no notes. She did not need them. James Whitaker worked for Ardent Logistics for 15 years. He started as a warehouse clerk and worked his way up to regional operations manager. In 15 years, he earned 11 performance bonuses, 3 promotions, and a letter from the chief executive himself calling him, and I quote, the backbone of our Southeast Division. Then, on a Tuesday morning in March, James Whitaker got a phone call telling him his position had been eliminated due to restructuring. There was no restructuring. His replacement, a man with 4 years of experience, started the following Monday. James Whitaker was not let go because his job disappeared. He was let go because someone decided he was the wrong face for the room. She sat down. Nathan Cole stood and buttoned his jacket. Your Honor, my client maintains that the termination of Mr. Whitaker was a standard business decision driven by operational efficiency and had nothing, absolutely nothing, to do with race. Elias leaned back in his chair. Then I look forward to seeing the operational data that supports that claim, Mr. Cole. Proceed. The trial unfolded the way discrimination trials do when the evidence is overwhelming and the defense knows it. Cole presented charts and memos and restructuring plans that looked clean on the surface. Voss took them apart one at a time. She called Whitaker's direct supervisor, who admitted, under oath, that he had been told to find a reason to let Whitaker go. She produced an email chain between 2 senior managers. The subject line read, Culture, Fit Concerns. The body contained a single sentence that emptied the air out of the room. He is a solid worker, but leadership wants someone who better reflects the client base. You know what that means. Elias read the sentence aloud, every word of it. He added no commentary. He did not need to. The sentence hung in the room like smoke. Everyone could see it. Nobody wanted to breathe it in. Nathan Cole objected. Elias overruled. Cole objected again. Elias overruled again. His voice did not change. His tone did not shift. He was a surgeon with a steady hand, and the thing on the table was plain to see. Roy Dalton stood at his post and suffered. Every minute was a year. Every word landed on his chest like a stone. He watched the man he had called nothing command a courtroom with a precision that made the veteran attorneys sit up straighter. The same man whose collar he had grabbed, the same man he had thrown down the steps, and with every ruling, the full weight of what he had done pressed down harder. Halfway through the plaintiff's second witness, it happened. Roy's radio slipped from his hand. It hit the floor with a sound like a gunshot, a sharp metallic crack that froze every head in the room. The jury turned. The attorneys turned. The gallery turned. Every pair of eyes landed on Roy Dalton, standing there with his hands still open, fingers trembling, staring at the radio like it had betrayed him. Elias did not look up. He kept writing on his legal pad, the pen moving in smooth, even strokes, as if nothing had happened, as if the man who had assaulted him that morning did not exist. That was worse than any punishment, and Dale Fisk knew it. He understood, watching from his corner, that the judge was not ignoring Roy out of kindness. He was ignoring him because Roy no longer mattered. Not in this room, not at this level. The man with the radio and the loud boots was furniture now, something in the corner nobody needed to acknowledge. Dale's stomach was a knot that would not untie. He had twisted that man's arm. He had helped drag a judge across the floor like a bag of trash because he wanted Roy to like him. And now Roy could not even hold his own radio. The trial went on. Elias ruled on every motion with a clarity that made the room lean in. He cited precedent from memory. He asked questions that exposed a lie before the witness had finished telling it. He was, by every measure that mattered, the most competent person in the building. The same building that had thrown him out 2 hours before. At 11:47 in the morning, Elias delivered his ruling. The court finds that the termination of James Whitaker was motivated by racial discrimination in violation of Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. The defendant is ordered to pay full back wages, compensatory damages in the amount of $312,500, and the plaintiff's legal fees. The court further orders the defendant to implement mandatory anti-discrimination training for all management-level employees within 90 days. He struck the gavel once. The sound filled the room. Eleanor Voss closed her eyes and exhaled. James Whitaker, sitting behind her in a borrowed suit, put his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking. Elias closed the file and set his pen on top of it. He looked out at the attorneys packing their briefcases, the jury filing out, the gallery buzzing with whispered reactions. Then he spoke again. Before we adjourn, there is one more matter this court needs to address. The room went still. Roy Dalton's knees locked. Elias looked directly at him for the first time since he had sat down. "Mr. Dalton, Mr. Fisk, please approach the bench." Roy's legs carried him forward, but the rest of him had already surrendered. He walked to the front of the room the way a man walks to the edge of a cliff, each step slower than the last. His boots, which had cracked so confidently across the marble that morning, barely whispered on the courtroom carpet. Dale Fisk followed 3 steps behind. He did not walk. He shuffled, eyes locked on the floor in front of his own moving shoes. His radio was still on the ground where he had dropped it. He had not picked it up. He would not. They stopped at the low wooden rail that separated the gallery from the court. Elias looked down at them from the bench. The same face, the same calm, but from up here, the calm was different. It was not passive anymore. It was authority. This morning, Elias began at approximately 6:45. I arrived at this courthouse for my first day as the presiding judge of this courtroom. The gallery murmured and let it pass. I sat on the bench outside this room to review my files. Within minutes, I was confronted by Bailiff Roy Dalton, who ordered me to leave. When I declined, I was slammed against a wall, seized by Mr. Dalton and Security Officer Dale Fisk, dragged across the lobby floor, and thrown out the front entrance of this building. Dead silence, not a murmur, not a cough, not a breath. The entire incident was captured by the courthouse security cameras. Elias nodded to the clerk. Nadine Colson pressed a button on her laptop with a hand that was not quite steady. The screen mounted on the wall, the one usually reserved for evidence, flickered to life. The footage was grainy but clear. The timestamp read 6:47 a.m. The courtroom watched Roy Dalton grab a man by the collar and slam him into the wall. They watched Dale Fisk twist the man's arm behind his back. They watched two uniformed officers drag a man in a charcoal vest across the marble while his briefcase fell open and his papers scattered like leaves. They watched Roy kick the front door open. They watched the man hit the stone steps. Nobody in the gallery moved. A woman in the third row covered her mouth. One of the Brightwater students closed his notebook and stared at the screen with his pen frozen in the air. The footage ended. The screen went dark. The room stayed silent. Elias let the silence do its work. 5 seconds. 10:15. Long enough for everyone in that room to understand exactly what they had seen. Long enough for the two men at the rail to relive every second of it in front of an audience. Then he spoke. "Mr. Dalton." Roy looked up. His eyes were wet. Not crying, not yet, but the kind of wet that comes right before a man loses control of something he has been holding together all morning. "I am filing a formal complaint with the State Judicial Conduct Commission and referring this matter to the State Attorney General's office for investigation of misconduct, abuse of authority, and assault by an officer of the court. Effective immediately, you are suspended without pay, pending the outcome of that investigation." Roy's mouth moved. Nothing came out. His chin dropped to his chest. His hands, the hands that had grabbed the collar 5 hours ago, hung limp at his sides, like tools he no longer knew how to use. Elias turned. "Mr. Fisk." Dale was already shaking, his jaw clenched so tight the muscles in his neck stood out like cables. He could not look up. "The same referral applies to you. Suspension without pay, effective immediately." Dale nodded, once a tiny, broken nod, the nod of a man who had known this was coming and had no argument left. He reached to his belt, unclipped his badge, and set it on the wooden rail. Then he unclipped his radio holster and set it beside the badge. He did not look at Roy. He turned and walked out through the side exit, and the door clicked shut behind him. Gone. Roy stood there alone now. The man who had had backup all morning suddenly had none. Elias leaned forward. "Mr. Dalton, you have the right to hire an attorney. I strongly suggest that you do." Roy opened his mouth. The room waited for an apology, for an excuse, for anything. "I did not," he started, then stopped, then started again. "I did not know." "I know," Elias said quietly. "That is exactly the problem." The courtroom did not erupt in shouts. It started with a single pair of hands in the back row, then another, then the whole gallery. James Whitaker clapped with tears running down his face. Eleanor Voss pressed her hands together and held them under her chin. Even two of the jurors, who were supposed to have already gone, had stopped at the door to watch. Elias picked up the gavel and struck it once. This is a courtroom, not a stadium. The applause stopped, but the charge in the air did not. It hung there like the quiet after lightning, and for just a moment, so brief that only someone looking for it would have caught it, the corner of Elias's mouth lifted. Not a smile, not quite, but close. Court is adjourned. The room emptied slowly, the way rooms empty when people do not want to leave. Attorneys glanced back at the bench. Reporters whispered to each other. The Brightwater students stood in the hallway, talking in the hushed electric tones of people who had just seen something they would tell their grandchildren about. James Whitaker was the last to leave the gallery. He stood in the aisle in his borrowed suit, slightly too big in the shoulders, and looked up at the bench. He said nothing. He placed his hand over his heart, held it there for 3 seconds, and walked out. Eleanor Voss waited for him at the door, put a hand on his shoulder, and they left together without a word. Grace Bellamy was waiting in the hallway when Elias came through, her blazer finely buttoned correctly, her legal pad pressed to her chest. She pushed off the wall and stepped into his path. "Your Honor." Her voice was steady. Her eyes were not. "I was there this morning. I saw what they did to you, and I did not move. Someone told me not to, and I listened. I need you to know that I am sorry, and I need you to know it will not happen again." Elias studied her for a moment, not judging, reading, the way he read case files, the way he read people. "Ms. Bellamy, next time you will speak up, because now you know exactly what silence costs." She nodded, eyes red, and did not blink. That afternoon she did something she had never done before. She opened the pro bono list, the one every associate ignored because the cases paid nothing, and the clients had nothing. She scrolled to the bottom. Arthur Nettles, 61, removed by force from the public library for sitting too long in the reading section. No charges filed, no explanation given, no lawyer willing to take the case. Grace clicked accept. At 4:55, Nadine Coulson knocked on Elias's door. She carried a single sheet of paper in both hands, the way you carry something fragile. "Judge Reed, I saw everything this morning in the hallway. All of it, and I walked away." Her voice cracked on the last word. She set the paper on the desk, a handwritten letter, 2 paragraphs, signed at the bottom. "I do not expect you to forgive me. I needed you to know." Elias read it, folded it once, and placed it in the desk drawer. "Thank you, Miss Coulson." She left, and the door closed softly behind her. Elias sat alone in his office. The late afternoon light came through the window in long gold bars, stretching across the floor and climbing the wall where the portraits of former judges hung in their dark oak frames, every face the same, every expression solemn. At the end of the row, the bare nail, the empty rectangle of darker paint. He reached into the briefcase and drew out a photograph, small and creased at the corners, soft from years of handling. His mother, standing in front of the Caldwell County Public Library, holding the hand of a 12-year-old boy who had just been told he did not belong there. She was smiling, the boy was not, but his chin was up. Elias leaned the photograph against the desk lamp and looked at it for a long time. Tomorrow, there would be a new face on that wall. We like to believe that dignity announces it itself, that it arrives in a robe and a title and a nameplate with bright new screws. But dignity is quieter than that. It is the man who picks his own wallet up off the floor without a word and keeps his hands steady. It is the woman who buttons her blazer correctly the second time and takes the case that pays nothing. It is the choice made in an ordinary hallway on an ordinary morning to see a person instead of a skin. And the harder choice to say something when the seeing costs you. The robe did not make Elias Reed a judge. It only made it impossible for the room to keep pretending he was not one. What he was, he had been all along, on the bench and on the steps, in the suit and in the dust. The title was new. The man was not. This story is a work of fiction. Every event, character, conversation, company, institution, and situation in this narrative is entirely imaginary, created for storytelling and to explore dignity, fairness, courage, and the human cost of prejudice. Nothing here represents actual events or should be read as fact. If this story moved you, take a moment to leave a comment and tell someone who needs to hear it today. Subscribe and share it with the people you love. And if you have ever been underestimated and chose to keep your dignity anyway, this one is for you. Remember this and carry it with you. Dignity is not a privilege. It is a basic right.